Okay, so welcome everyone again, and thank you very much for being here with the London Hub today. This is a very special event, and we have Carl Gombrich with us, who is going to be our special guest for this event, and we're very, very fortunate to have him joining today. So thank you very much, Carl, for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you everyone for participating and for co-creating this event with us, right? So before we start, just introduce myself. I am Yasmin, the SI community, one of the SI community developers and part of the London Hub core team. And I'm going to co-host and facilitate this session with my colleague, Anya Loy, who is going to support the session today with some sticky notes and some information that we're going to present as we go along. So this is an interview that is going to take 60 minutes. It's being recorded and it's going to be available on the SI London Hub YouTube channel afterwards. And you're more than welcome to use the chat to post any questions or comments that you'd like, and we can address them as we go along as well. Okay. So, as I said, today our guest is Carl Gombrich, and a bit about his biography. Carl is the academic lead and part of the funding team building the LIS, London Interdisciplinary School. He's experienced in higher education leadership, innovation, and capacity building, especially with respect to interdisciplinary courses and interdisciplinarity. He has led for more than 8 years the team who created, designed, implemented, and developed the game-changing arts and science bachelor's degree at UCL. So again, thank you very much, Carl, for being here. It's a pleasure to have you and to start this interview.
Thank you, Yasmin. Very much looking forward to it. As you know, I've enjoyed Yoss's work and what you guys are doing. So it's nice to make a little bit more of a proper social connection, and I hope this is the start of more conversations.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you. So before we start, I'll just give a quick introduction to our structure today. So yes, this introduction is 5 minutes. Then we're going to spend the majority of the time with the interview with some questions. And then afterwards, we're just going to wrap up and have a moment for feedback in the end. Okay, so it's a total of 1 hour. And this mirror board is going to be here for you afterwards. But in the meantime, you can just relax and enjoy the session. Okay, so before we start, I always like to have a space for our guests to introduce themselves and to explain a bit more about their background better, of course, better than I would do. So what do you think is important for people to know about your background so they can understand the work that you do now, Carl?
Thanks, Yasmin. I don't know if there's anyone on the call about my age, but when you get in your late 50s and on, it's quite difficult to know what to summarize and how. But I guess I'll try, and you just stop me if I've said too much or going irrelevant. So I'm from an extremely intellectual background. I think that's not an exaggeration. Both my grandparents were among the greatest scholars of the 20th century in their fields. I say that with a giggle because it's a kind of pressure most people don't experience. But yeah, my paternal grandfather was one of the greatest art historians of the 20th century, and my maternal grandfather was political science at Harvard. Of course, you don't know his name because I don't have the same name, but among his students were JFK and Henry Kissinger. So he had some interesting times. And then my father was a professor of Sanskrit and Buddhism at Oxford for many years. He was a professor in his early 30s there. So I come from that background. And although I would have never thought it growing up or even into my adulthood, I think that played a much bigger part in my thinking than I recognized for a long time. So I didn't go to an elite school. On the contrary, my parents sent me to a very ordinary local school. They were kind of hippies from the 60s who believed in, going against the system. So I went to a very ordinary school, which meant I was very bored and very disruptive at school a lot, and did okay. My A-levels not great, was very lost for a very long time, but always enjoyed music. So I ended up going to music college for a while. Didn't complete that the first time around, and in my mid-20s, I did degrees in maths and physics because I just missed the intellectual world so much. Then I went back to music, and I did complete then a very prestigious postgraduate program in opera singing at the National Opera School, where I was the Royal Opera House Scholar. So I had the Plum Scholarship at a postgraduate place. They only take 12 people a year. And I had a short career as an opera singer then. But then my intellectual roots of blood being thicker than water, as they say, again pushed back, and I was very unhappy as an opera singer. There wasn't enough real problem solving for me, not enough intellectual work. And so I got a job teaching physics at UCL, but a very modest job on their foundation courses teaching physics. Around that time, I also took an MA in philosophy. And long story short, that was in 2002. I ended up running some courses at UCL, and then was given this amazing opportunity in 2010, 13 years ago now, to build what was then and still is in the UK higher education system, the most radical and kind of rich interdisciplinary undergraduate program that the UK offers. And yeah, everything sort of came together then. So a lot of wandering in my life, a lot of learning. I did a lot of learning in sciences. Then through the music, I studied languages. I'd always been interested in literature. And not just opera singing, I had a sideline also as a funk drummer for a while. So I'd done a lot of things. And then it was kind of Web 2.0 was just taking off, had just taken off. And there was this sort of explosion in combinatory possibilities. And I sort of saw that as a real opportunity for young people. And I saw how work was changing as well, partly from weird things that I'd done and also contemporaries. So although I was in my early 40s by then, I was kind of riding a young wave of what I think education had to become at that point, and should still be becoming, and we're still stuck in the sort of early thousands or even 20th century with regard to education, though we're just so far behind now, it's not funny. But anyway, that gave me the kind of mindset and experience to lead a team at UCL designing this wonderful degree. And that kind of made my career. So they made me a professor of interdisciplinary education, professorial teaching fellow to be precise, because I'm not a researcher in the traditional sense. I've now written lots of papers and so on, but it was action research, was doing it basically. It wasn't writing about it, it was doing stuff. And I got to sit on some very prestigious committees on interdisciplinarity and so on. And so that was a wonderful 9 years in which everything came together. I also learned masses. I was working 7 days a week, 14 hours a day on this project. And so I learned a lot of new stuff and brought together a lot of old stuff. And so having done that, I had a taste for educational entrepreneurship. And then when the founders of this new institution approached me, I didn't need much persuading actually, because I didn't want to sit around at UCL becoming the grand old man of interdisciplinary education. That's never been me. I always like a challenge, always like to be learning the hardest stuff, the hardest part of the curve when you're just learning at the beginning, you don't know what's going on. So it seemed like an opportunity too good to miss to start a university entirely on interdisciplinary lines. And so that's what we've been doing. Been here 4 years now. I've had students for 2 years. It's an incredible project. Hasn't been really attempted anywhere before like this, certainly not in the UK. And yeah, we'll see where it goes, but it's certainly a journey, and I think a very necessary one. It feels important what we're doing here, even though honestly, it's not an easy life. It's not an easy life setting up a new university in the regulated. Actually, it's a systems problem. You're trying to enter the system to change the system, but you guys will know that if you're too alien to the system, you get booted out or you get killed. And if you're too similar to the system, you won't change the system. So try and do that classic sort of intervention where you're just the right level of difference in the system to be a catalyst for change, but not so different that you're not recognized and you can't survive within the ecosystem.
Wow, yeah. And I mean, it must be a very challenging position maybe to be in, to be in this middle ground, right? In terms of, as you're saying, not be too inside the system, but not to be too outside of it. So how how has this experience been for you?
Yeah. So we had to make that decision really right at the beginning. We're like, are we going to be a bona fide university, which means getting regulation from the government? And once you decide that, you automatically inherit a lot of legacy thinking, which you just have to exhibit in order to get those licenses, if you like. And or do we stay outside? Do we become more like a General Assembly or some version of Coursera or something, which would have been in many ways a lot easier, but actually long-term not, because then you're really a startup and you have all the risks of being a startup financially and trying to survive. So it was a mixture of things. So because we're a regulated university, we have the student loan book, so students get a grant and they can pay us for that. So that's a sort of financial core of stability if we recruit enough students. And lots of trade-offs, pros and cons. And in the end, we all decided we wanted this to be known as a university, that people would look back and say, that's the university that started to really change the system. Look at what they struggled through and achieved. So we did make that decision, but that meant, I mean, I think we wrote 2 million words of regulatory documentation. And there was a point about 18 months in when I was, it was Sunday night, 2 a.m, whatever, and I was on tab 77 of a spreadsheet, and I was like, I really didn't leave UCL in my mid-50s to do this, because I could have been just going around the world to Hong Kong and Valparaiso telling them about the great degree at UCL. But anyway, we got through that, and it's a roller coaster. Definitely are ups and downs, but I get nice events like this still, which are nice to contribute to and be part of. And we're just coming to the end of our second year of the undergraduate cohort now, and they're doing their really interesting term 3 projects with the kind of range of tools we taught them. I'll tell you a bit more about the curriculum later, maybe. And so that's all worthwhile, I think. And I'm glad we made that decision to be a real university. It feels, as I say, it feels kind of urgent and important in a way, because we're challenging the system in a way that it might not if we were just a kind of another startup trying to leverage the internet in some way for learning.
Yes, that's great. And as Joss is saying here, and I guess you have to adapt yourself to find that space, to find that in between, right? And it's always this process of constant adaptation and constant looking in and out, and just very flexible, let's say, way of being, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These are all themes very close to interdisciplinarity, which of course you guys will know does intersect a lot with systems thinking. Zooming in and zooming out, we talk about a lot, and we try to get young people, encourage them to do it. It's not easy. I think there's a whole discussion here, which we'll maybe come back to, which is about adult development and the mindsets which we all go through in life, and when we're ready to hear and accept new things and change ourselves in some way. And I think a lot of the challenge in my world, what I've done is I want to sort of accelerate young people's development, because I think it's so necessary for the modern world. But they're fighting, and I'm fighting with them, their natural development pace, if you like. And for an 18 or 19-year-old to have any idea of what zooming right out, to the maximal frame and then zooming in again and back out again is very, very challenging. So, I still love it. It's why I work with this age group. I think it's so important and exciting. And these are hopefully the leaders of the change makers of tomorrow. But there's definitely always, particularly in year 1, actually, this incredible friction between how they think they should learn, what they think they should learn, why they're learning it. And there's a constant dialogue and reassurance and going back and forth about that. But yeah, so we have to stay very adaptable. I just want to say, a lot of this depends on the team that you can build around you. And of course, I've been very fortunate, or perhaps not fortunate, perhaps this is something I'm good at, is building a team of people who get it and are very well aligned, not totally aligned so that we're not challenging each other and growing, which we do constantly, but aligned enough somehow that we all stick together on the project. So I'm really delighted that literally every single person that we put through the hiring process since 2019 on the faculty has stayed with us. The only person who hasn't stayed was someone I didn't put through that process for all sorts of reasons which were wrong. I learned a lesson, wasn't right for them, wasn't right for us, and they haven't stayed. But everyone else who kind of answered the advert, submitted the video we required, came and gave a guest talk for us, has kind of got it and been with us all the way along. And that's incredibly important, as you know, in systems change. You need to take like-minded people with you, go much stronger together to create an institution than just being on your own and presenting PowerPoints or strategy documents. That's never going to cut it.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Bringing people together, right? It's a tough but very necessary step in order to do something different and thinking different in
I think with regard to some of the themes that Jos has talked about on YouTube, and I'm actually now talking about them to the NHS. We've got a very interesting professional development project going with the NHS on leadership. It's about what leadership means in complex environments in many ways. And of course, it's sort of maximally distributive, maximally democratic, but there's also, and this isn't the phrase I made up, so I'm happy to use it because my boss made it up. He said, Carl, I sort of still want you to be the governing mind of what's going on here. And it's more like the sort of gardener role almost. You don't always do much, you don't intervene much, and you may not even quite know what you want your garden to look like in 6 months or 2 years' time. But you do have a responsibility for whatever reason, either given to you or it's what you do well, to guide the garden. And to not intervene too much to destroy the complexity. So a lot of what I've done the last few years is literally kind of just observe. I mean, of course, I'm very active too. I teach a lot on the program. Actually, I'm incredibly busy, but I don't direct too much those members that we've brought in because I think they get it. And one nice example of this actually is we come up with 2 principles, guiding principles for the curriculum, which we didn't try and even do for the first kind of probably 18 months to 2 years. But then it happened quite quickly. And I can tell you those principles because I'm amazed how robust they've been. No one's really got upset with them, even people that have joined since then. And it's about what we think we're doing with our students on the curriculum, and they are these. So we say, we believe that in order to tackle complex problems, so already in there we use the word tackle rather than solve, because we don't think you can solve complex problems, you can only tackle them, perhaps improve the system. So we believe in order to tackle complex problems, 1, you need to pursue multiple perspectives. We thought about that very carefully. We all agreed on multiple perspectives, but the word pursue became important. So you seek them out, you pursue multiple perspectives. And 2, you need to think in terms of networks and relationships. And both of those are actually extremely original for a university curriculum, because nobody goes to university thinking they need to get multiple perspectives from their discipline. So we think that, and we actually ask students to pursue multiple disciplinary perspectives on whatever problem they're doing. And the other one about networks and relationships is also really radical, because I actually encourage my students on their assignments to ask their father, ask their friends, contact someone like Jos and say, how would they do this assignment? For me, that's not cheating. That's just intelligent use of connections and leverage in the modern world. So often we're in a conversation and I'll say to a student, well, don't you know someone who can do that? And they go, yeah, of course I do. Can I? I say, well, just ring them up, and ask them how they would present this video or research this topic. And so we're trying to encourage students all the time to think outside the rather confining constraints of, this is my assignment, I've got to do what's on the rubric only for the teacher. I mean, of course, you do have to do the rubric, but the way you get there is to think in terms of networks and relationships and leveraging that to create something that's good. Don't sort of languish in your bedroom and think, I can't do this. This network the internet's given us is historically unimaginable 40 years ago, so use it positively. So those are 2 examples, simple statements, deceptively simple, but they emerged, one of our favorite words, out of sort of 2 years of understanding and working together, and lots of discussions and disagreements, but minorish disagreements. And then in basically a sort of probably a 1 hour or half-hour workshop, we came to those on a Miro board. I remember it, and they're still with us, 18 months on, more than that now, nearly 2 years on, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this very important topic, right? Networks and interrelationships. And I think that goes into this part of the interview as well, that we understand that the education system, it's not ideal. And I think I would say that it's failing in a lot of ways, right? And let's say one of the ways that education now is set up is being a siloed way of doing and learning and understanding. So as you're talking about interrelationships and of course interdisciplinary interdisciplinarity. This is one way to see education differently, right? So what are the main challenges, right, that you see nowadays the education system faces, and why are they not working? Why are they detrimental?
Yeah, there are so many challenges. I mean, I guess firstly you have to think what education is for, and everyone will have a different view about this. I think it's okay to say it's for two things. One is to help you get a good job and be integrated into the world in a way which helps you survive. And another is personal development. And I don't see why we have to create a dichotomy of those two things. I think you can get both those things out of your education. I think you should try to get both those things. So I think if you only go for one, you'll probably be a bit frustrated in one way or another because the other thing won't work out for you. And I think it's possible to have it all in a way in the modern world. I mean, that is quite a culture, depends a bit on the culture you're in and your privilege in a way. But certainly if you get a good job in the knowledge economy, or you're able to start a small business about something you care about, that should be able to give you an intersection between your passions, what you care about, your purpose, and some kind of intellectual growth and challenge as well. And I guess so it is very context dependent, that, and I'm lucky in having worked in London in elite places, but it's pretty widespread nonetheless. I mean, we're now talking about a global class of people who have that opportunity, and I think should be given that opportunity, and even more, we should be giving that opportunity to people not from the global middle class, but who might not realize that with the right skill sets and mindsets and introductions and networks, they too can think about an education which both helps them grow and gives them a livelihood which is sustaining. And I think basically, certainly in this country where you just study a single discipline for 3 years, it really does neither of those things optimally. I mean, there's great data I use a lot about the total lack of connection now in this country between single honors disciplines and graduate jobs. So it's about 86% of all graduate employers in this country don't care, that's the words they use, don't care what discipline an undergraduate studied at the university. That's pretty amazing. Talking 90% of graduate employers, banks, consultancies, museums, government bodies don't care what anyone studied at university. So why are we insisting on these very narrow disciplinary conceptions of what university should be if literally it makes no difference to your future employment? And then I think to look at it more positively, surely people would feel more enriched personally if they did have the chance to study a wider base of knowledge. It's called the Institute for Student Employers, Michael. I can send you a PDF afterwards if you like. It was featured in The Guardian. I think the actual report is now behind a paywall, but I wrote a piece for it when it came out, and you might be able to find it from the Guardian newspaper around 2019. They reported on the report in the Guardian newspaper, and that statistic's been going up, unsurprisingly, when you think what's been happening to the world since the mid-thousands. So the OU did some research on that in the mid-thousands. It was around 60%, I think. And then this ISE body, who used to be called something slightly different, but they carried the research on, have tracked that over the last sort of 6-7 years, and it's been going up 77%. 80%, now at 86%. Well, it was 3 years ago, and I can't imagine it's gone down significantly. So yeah, so the question is then, if you don't need to study a single discipline to get a good job, on the contrary, why should you? And for many of us, most of us, we're much more interested in than just one subject in the world, and we like to see the connections and we want to explore that. I think, I mean, apart from bureaucratic challenges and fun and departmental challenges, and I can bore you all day about the administration of why this is so hard at university. I think there's a more interesting question for me as an educator, and maybe people on this call, about rigor and intellectual challenge. I do think interdisciplinarity really risks becoming superficial, and I think that's where the main worry about interdisciplinarity comes from a more traditional disciplined academics, that you're just going to do a bit of this and a bit of that, and how can it ever get profound? How can you ever cognitively stretch yourself and therefore sort of intellectually grow and know hard stuff, which might be useful? And I think that is a very fair challenge. I think it's the right challenge for us to always be thinking about, and it's why at our university we've concentrated on methods. Michael, you're chucking me lots of interesting questions, but I'm just going to try and get stuff out and not get too derailed. So it's a bug in this platform, feature, not a bug of these platforms. So I'll come back to that. It solves a couple of problems at least, Michael. But if you teach people methods, methods can be really hard. I mean, you're teaching people data science, and data science is hard. It starts fairly hard and it goes on, it gets harder and can get really, really hard to the point where you're working for Sam Altman, creating some kind of AI model, right? But if you insist on all students doing that and then allow them to go as high as they like in that and say, but you can apply your data science kind of wherever you like. We're not going to say it has to be applied to business or wherever. And we'll build into that some kind of interdisciplinary aspect. So an obvious one for data science I was talking about with the supervisee this morning is always, where's the data from? How is it collected? What is the absolute foundational source for those computer labels you're giving to that data? Garbage in, garbage out. And heaven knows there's a lot of garbage out there. So can you get behind the algorithms and the big claims about data set to find out who collected that, how it was collected, all the missing data, all the errors in classifications. And that's all qualitative research. It's not quantitative, that stuff. So there are all sorts of ways you can give methods, which are both qualitative and quantitative. And at LIS, we've also gone down the visual methods route, which is really interesting, how to make great visual products in arts and infographics, in web design, which are really hard. They're really rigorous, but you simply wouldn't get hardly any of those methods unless you did a particular discipline which required those particular methods. So my answer to the kind of intellectual rigor question, intellectual challenge question is, our courses are really, really demanding because they require firstly a breadth of methods to start out with, and then we allow students to specialize in one or two methods as they go through their degree, but always keeping something quantitative and something qualitative. So you could become a really, really good video maker and video editor at the end of this, but you could also know exactly how to use Python visual libraries to do that, or to edit it, and the interplay between those two very different worlds and so on. And this is the sort of thing I saw my graduates at UCL doing, getting the most extraordinary job opportunities because they had these unique skill sets, combining different methods, abilities, and knowledge bases together. So that's very challenging because we think of university as imparting knowledge bases, basically, to students, canons of literature, basically, canons of facts. I think that's completely gone pretty much now. You can do all that stuff staying home all day and watching fantastic podcasts on it. But we have to give students something really worthwhile and something that stretches them intellectually and develops them. And you can do that by requiring them to learn methods. So I think, hopefully I've answered that question. I mean, there is a ton of stuff around school systems. I mean, academics, right, tend to want to recreate themselves in their students. So it's perfectly natural. We all do that to some extent, but that's fairly disastrous then for sixth formers at school, because if you want to go and do history, you really kind of have to do history, one other humanities subject, and maybe a science. If historian is going to look at someone doing maths, physics, and chemistry. In this country, we have this terribly narrow system and think, well, how are they going to do history? But we are not reproducing academics at university. We haven't been since the 80s, when we went to sort of double figures of students coming to university. The number who've gone to be academics from undergraduate degrees is vanishingly small now, well under 1%. So we should not be educating students as if they were going to be academics, which is basically what the system is set up to do, at least in this country. It's slightly different in the States. I know we've got people from the States on the call, and it's slightly different. And of course, context is everything in education. And some of what I'm saying might seem almost like motherhood and apple pie, is that the word? Anyway, very trivial to you because you have very good interdisciplinary colleges already, but we really don't in Europe. And what is different about us, I think, is the application. We're very applied liberal arts, if you like, or liberal arts and sciences, and the strong emphasis on methods rather than bodies of knowledge, which students will unearth when they come to tackle problems through using the right methodologies, but we don't try and impart sort of great canons of knowledge to them in the learning.
Yeah, so I think that goes actually to some of the questions that Michael was having, and I think something that is very important and fundamental to ask, right? What exactly is interdisciplinarity, and what are the interdisciplinary approaches?
So interdisciplinarity is combining two or more disciplinary methods and or knowledge bases together to achieve an outcome that could not have been achieved with only one of the disciplines. And, you know, it's not really surprising that as the world gets more complex and interconnected, you need more and more of that. What's very difficult, and I still struggle with this now, is to give a kind of completely general description of that which everyone gets and work. Everyone can see in detail and grasp at one go. So what I've just said is abstract enough that probably most people on this call believe me, and I can give you sources if you really want to know the sociology of the acceleration pace of life and on, but probably everyone on this call kind of believes the world is more complex, more interconnected, and therefore we need kind of knowledge which mirrors that, if you like. But it's still hard to convince, you know, school children what exactly they will be after this sort of education. And then what isn't at all hard, because I do it all the time now, is case studies of my graduates, right? I mean, I just have tens of these things. And as soon as you say the example, everyone's like, yeah, of course, of course. I didn't think of that, but now you tell me, I recognize it as a sort of almost a typical modern job and modern trajectory for a young person in the modern world. So it's like, it's multiple. You have a kind of almost infinite, or let's say hundreds of multiple examples in this multiple space of interdisciplinary combinations that work. And yet stepping that to the kind of synthesis of that multiple in such a way that everyone goes, yeah, of course, and I'm going to be one of those multiples, is still challenging in the way that saying, describing to someone you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer isn't challenging. And I don't quite know why that is, because no school kid really knows what law is when they set out to do law. It's just an image they have from TV and some other things, that's what a lawyer does. But we know that lawyers do hundreds of things, and probably when you're starting on law, you've no idea actually what it's going to be. And yet somehow in my world, it's difficult to convince students that you're going to be able to tackle complex problems. You're going to have incredible range of methods which will allow you to navigate the knowledge and digital economy better than most other people. That isn't coherent enough for many young people in the way that understanding, say, law or medicine or engineering is. So that's a challenge, certainly selling that. And I fall back on the case studies. If I have the chance, I tell them the amazing things my students are doing, which I can certainly do now if you want to, but we might want to talk about some other things as well.
Sure, yeah. And in terms of actually implementing these approaches and the framework in the educational institutions, what are the barriers that you see in actually implementing that or developing interdisciplinary projects?
Well, one barrier I thought I saw when I started out was this idea of progression. Could you have a student on my program at UCL doing basically an eighth of their undergraduate major in organic chemistry, an eighth in accounting, an eighth in Arabic, and an eighth in management and something else? And I was anxious about that because of my background in physics and maths. We need a lot of hard work to get up to those levels. And I was conscious I was taking a bit of a risk with young people's future, and I wasn't comfortable with that. Skin in the game is my fundamental moral principle, and I had to live without that for a while, except I would have looked very bad had it not worked out, but it wouldn't have been as bad for me as for the young people. What was absolutely amazing to me, and we underestimate how possible this is that young people with the right environment support and a bit of guidance can do that. And that what's more interesting, even they make connections which actually help them do that. So we had in my 5 years heading the program, so 2 years set up, 5 and a bit years, no, it must have been 6 years. Anyway, the number of people left because I graduated 5 years, so I was there 7 years, that's right. We had many times our students who weren't single honors would get the top marks in the departmental exams of the final year. We had it twice in chemistry, once in linguistics, once in philosophy, and a few others I've probably forgotten now. And I was scratching my head for a while. Yeah, identity is a really interesting point. I want to come back to that. I was like, how is it that this is happening? And all sorts of theories came up about why this is happening, like interleaving. So you guys probably know from learning sciences that there's some good evidence that rather than just study one thing for a long time and kind of drill it, it's actually better to interleave the learning with very different things. This certainly applies in sport, where they've discovered that rather than serve exactly the same tennis ball to someone for 2 hours in a row, mix it up. And initially, it's very, very challenging, and the learner doesn't like it because they don't feel they're making progress. But the curve looks like this. and the outcomes are very strong because you're sort of prepared for everything. So cognitively, you sort of retained enough plasticity and adaptability to cope with whatever comes at you. And this is just a theory because we can't test it, but I had a neuroscience colleague, a professor of neuroscience at UCL, who said perhaps that's what's going on here. You sort of got a cognitive epistemological interleaving here, where these young people are chucked around these very different knowledge spaces, and they didn't like it much at the beginning. It's very demanding, psychologically demanding, emotionally demanding, but by year 2 and 3 they're starting to see all these connections that's actually helping them in new knowledge spaces, and they become more powerful when they go into somewhere completely new. And certainly, I mean, in terms of case studies, or otherwise known as anecdotes, I think I could certainly rustle up 30 of those now quite quickly, where students did go on that journey and ended up with an undergraduate dissertation, and then in many cases have now completed PhDs by taking all these different things at once. So that seemed like a barrier, but wasn't a barrier. But I do think that when you propose these sorts of courses to your standard academic, they won't believe it. They will just say, that's not possible. In my discipline, you have to do, 120 credits a year of each of these things to achieve anything worthwhile. I think part of the problem here is, again, a perception of expertise. It goes back to what we're trying to produce here. And the students that I graduated, they're expert in these niche new areas, and they're experts because of their interdisciplinarity, not in spite of it. So one of my students completed a PhD in engineering, climate change engineering. Let me say it correctly. It's complicated, but it's a good example actually, because it's so niche. So she's an engineer in the risk of small island states exposed to flooding by climate change. And that was a PhD completed in the Department of Engineering at Oxford University. And her background from my degree was a combination of environmental engineering, environmental economics, environmental law, and some environmental sociology. And she's a completely unique expert, so much so that her kind of PhD is something the World Bank are really interested in, because no one has that combination of skill sets, and is able to bring together all those different metrics to understand the risk of these states to those to this situation. You could put an engineer in there who can build a flood defense system, has no idea of the economics of it, the legality of the local area, anything. You can get a lawyer in and say, you can't do this, you can't do that, but can't help you build this, and so on. So this student can do all that. And then I have, of course, other people now working in areas you will, of course, know about, like AI and law. This was bubbling for a few years. It's rather exploded in the last few months, right? My students who've got the technical skills from some computer science and some coding, they've done some philosophy on the ethics, and they've done some modules on law. They're suddenly just like, they're commanding six-figure salaries in their mid-20s. And you just see this repeated again and again and again. The students have made these interesting and brave connections, and now fitting into this network of knowledge at these nodes where no one else can go. And in fact, one of those very students had a lovely metric he said to me the other day, and I put this on a slide recently. He said, Carl, it's not that difficult to be in the top. He says, very, very difficult to be the top 1% of anything in the world. It's actually not that difficult when you think of everyone who hasn't gone to university or anything to be in the top 20% of 3 things. And if you actually do the calculus, if I'm going to get this right, now 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2 is 0.08. So you're in the top 0.8% of people in that combination of 3 things by taking the top 20% of them. And have I got that right? I hope. Why I hesitate? It always seems too good to be true. That can't be right. That can't be right. Actually, I think it really is. And it's brilliant, a brilliant insight. And he's right. And that's what I see these students doing. And it's a great calculus, because you can go very broad, and take some top 50% of maybe 10 things, and you still find yourself in that totally unique spot where no one else has that combination. I see this all the time now, my students. So it's a joy to see that testimony from UCL grads, and hopefully we'll now have similar outputs from LIS.
Oh,
Can I come back to this identity question from Chuck?
Yeah.
I really like that. I'm not quite sure of the angle of your question, Shikara, but I do think identity for young people in their learning is massively underrated and not really discussed, because it hasn't risen before. If a kid goes to study economics at university and goes, "Oh, you're an economist," are they an economist? Heck no, they don't know anything really about economics. They haven't been an economist, but it takes care of your identity for you. You don't have to worry about that crisis. If you're studying, combinations of, let me take some other ones so that you keep getting this richer picture of the sort of things my students did. Neuroscience and architecture. Two of these students are now doing a PhD at UCL on the built environment and the effect of that on our well-being. For the first year you're an undergraduate, your grandmother's going, you're doing what? Neuroscience and architecture, what's the point of that? That's crazy. Decide what you want to do, do it. And that's really schizophrenic for a young learner. It's really hard to articulate why you're doing this and indeed what you are. So I always tell my students, don't even ask the question what you are, just say what you're interested in and why you're interested in it, and try to encourage people to come with you on that journey. And then usually, although even that's hard when you're starting out, but usually maybe by the second or third year, you can tell a good story. There's a good narrative about why you're choosing those 3 or 4 disciplines, or 2 or 3 disciplines, and how they help you focus on the very thing you're interested in a way which other things wouldn't. You'd just be following the boring track of a subject without really knowing what it was focusing on. But I do think that identity point for a learner is a really interesting and underrated point, and it probably bears some proper research, actually.
Great, yes. And as Michael was asking as well, so how does a person know what would resonate with them?
So I think there's no substitute there for sampling, Michael. I think we have to encourage people to sample a lot more in learning and in careers. And again, the US system much better for this, I think, particularly with regard to learning. I'm not so sure how good the US is on sort of internships and things like that. That's something we at LAS have really gone in big on. So we guarantee internships to our students, and every year we try to give them a range of opportunities from very small startups to corporate to non-profit and governmental. And we know this from our own lives. I mean, look at me. I was middle-class slacker and wanderer for years, where I knew what I wanted to do. And I just think again for students from tougher backgrounds where there's less of a security net and a lesser feeling that one can explore safely, I think it's really important to show them that it's okay to try a few things out before you settle on something. But yeah, I'd be all for the first year doing a lot of sampling, self-conscious sampling and reflection on your learning and your career thoughts.
Great, that's brilliant. Thank you. And so we're getting to the end of our session here, and I think it's always good to share some of the, let's say, the tacit experience that you'd have that could benefit other people that are pursuing similar ideas. And I think it goes towards what Eric is asking as well. Just what are the experiential learnings that you've got with your experience that you would tell people when they're pursuing influencing the systems that they are part of?
It's a huge question. I think we touched on a little bit of it at the beginning about building a team with a common language, but not totally aligned, so that it's constantly challenging and refreshing. If you're in an old institution, as I was at UCL, you definitely need support from the very top people in the hierarchy. It won't happen otherwise. I mean, I didn't really have a right to get that job because I wasn't very senior when I got it, but I had the backing of the number one person. I mean, I actually like to joke that they kind of employed me because if it failed, it would be my fault because I was a nobody. And if I succeeded, then everyone would go, oh, good job, Carl, and the boss. What a great idea. So you don't know. I mean, I don't know. I was very grateful they gave me the opportunity and it worked out well for everyone. But I think without his backing, it was actually number one and number two wanted that degree at UCL. I wouldn't have been able to sort of go into those rooms with some pretty tough middle-aged chemists, let me tell you, going in a strong northern accent, what a load of rubbish, what are you doing with our education system, you know. But I love the robustness of the conversation, but would I have been able to push it over the line and say, look, give my students the chance to take your modules, you'll see it'll be all right. If I didn't have the backing of the very top person, I don't know. So I think it depends what you're trying to do. Now we are, as we said earlier, kind of a new node in the system. That sort of discussion isn't so important. So basically I've gone from being an intrapreneur to an entrepreneur, and I think that is a very important distinction for how you operate. As an entrepreneur, creating an institution I think you have to have a clear story. And I've shared with you that sometimes, even now, 13 years into this journey, I struggle with the one-liner. I've got evidence I'm convincing if you give me 20 minutes, even maybe 5 minutes, but the one-liner, the strap line on the web page is still really difficult. So get a story that you can tell repeatedly with passion that works. Is very simple. Get some case studies that confirm your story and that people can see themselves in, recognize. I think that it's important not to, for me, again, different on what you're trying to do, I think, but to not be so radical and confrontational that you alienate the system entirely. I mean, one of the things that definitely helped me at UCL is going to help us here is when our students get traditional, very high-powered jobs after graduating. So I am no fan of the current banking system and Chicago economics or neoliberalism in general, but there's no doubt that when our students get starting salaries as near 6 figures at Goldman Sachs or Deutsche Bank or Barclays or Deloitte, there's a certain credibility that goes with that. Now, that does depend on how radical you're trying to be and what you're trying to achieve, but I don't think we could grab on in any way to the current system without showing that we can do that and a lot of other stuff that we think is more interesting, more important and better. But we have to be able to say, yeah, of course we can do all that. It's boring. Yeah, our best students can do that if they want, if they really want to earn a ton of money. But look at this person who started a global climate change network that's actually leveraging indigenous knowledge in Scotland. Also some incredible things that people do. That's the fun story, and we hope that excites 80% of our students at least. But I think don't throw away your conventional gains when they come, because you need those too. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
That's great, definitely. And yeah, just the final part of this session is about the future, right? So you talked about LIS and some of the amazing activities and projects that you have there going on. And I think in terms of the future of higher education, right, how do you envision that to be in a couple of years? Or maybe.
That's great. So as I say, I love what we do. I think it's urgent. I'm really reassured about our curriculum. I think our basic conception, I haven't really told you, so I'll tell it now. So we only have 2 parts of the curriculum: problems and methods. So every term our students tackle a real world problem: inequality, sustainability, technology and ethics, urban futures, whatever it might be. And we sandwich that, if you like, between these methods, which they learn, quantitative and qualitative methods. That is very simple. That is a one-liner, I can tell. And people kind of get it at that level. And then it's the drill down. So what are these methods? How will I learn them? How will I combine them? That's when they find it very hard to see that from this side of it. Once they go through, and I can tell the case studies, they get it. So that is our very innovative curriculum, which I think is very coherent and I think really works. I'm not going to hide from you the challenge of recruiting students to this because they come from an entirely different universe. I mean, my kids are just this age now. One's just finished his school results exams, one's just entering the GCSE level, 16-year-old. I mean, they literally talk in terms of education as a 12 marker versus a 3 marker versus a 5 marker. Every single thing they learn is automatically slotted into an exam question of a certain size and length. I mean, it's that far from what I do. It's like an alien, really. And so that journey, and my kids are smart, but that journey to get to like, okay, you're here now, how are you going to solve this problem? They have no idea. They go, well, you tell me. And we go, well, no, because then you're not learning and you're not learning to solve the problem. So there's an enormous journey to get students from school to this kind of education, keep them here, and then have them graduate doing what we think are worthwhile things. So that is an immense challenge. I'm not going to hide it. And I don't think this country is at the moment going in the right direction with regard to this. It seems we seem to be retrenching. I can't help but think that AI must change this now. How on earth will you insist on the current exam system and structure when kids can just go home and do all their coursework by typing the question into the computer? But I don't know. I mean, this country is a very, very conservative place, which in some ways makes it lovely. We were talking earlier, Yasmin, about our countryside and our country habit. It's all very lovely in Britain in a way. But what sort of students are you reproducing if you teach them about kings and queens and and ask them to they can do all their assignments by typing them into an AI box? So I don't know. I think this might change things finally in some very radical way, but we just don't know what that's going to do yet. I think universities must have more connection with the outside world. So porosity, we call it. It's not my term, it's a term due to a colleague of mine at UCL. We need to be porous with external organizations. And particularly in our second term of the first year, students produce a consultancy report for an external organization on sustainability. Fantastic experience for a first year student. In the first term, they do something a little lighter touch, a little bit less scary. They do a pitch to an external organization, and we need them to see that what they're learning has immediate applicability, I think. Again, maybe not for all students. You need to keep a piece of higher education for the totally theoretically driven. I'm not for destroying all of universities by any means. This is about numbers and matters of degree. It's probably 2% of undergrads who are going to benefit from really thinking about theoretical physics or theoretical linguistics in that way. And we need that. They need to do it. But the rest of them need to think much more, what is the point of what I'm learning? Who out there cares about this? Why does what I'm learning have any value to someone else outside the university? So I hope and believe we'll see more of that. I do think that is happening in other places as well. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I made some predictions about MOOCs that were wrong. I thought MOOCs would really, really disrupt higher education, as many people did in 2012. That was completely unfounded. And it seems that many of the things we thought, we didn't think universities were important for, like deadlines and cohort and peer experience, are actually incredibly important. They're what drive people to university, the kind of structure and peer pressure that obliges you to learn, really. It's like joining a gym, or having a coach. We all believe we're going to get faster and do our weekly runs and yoga, but we don't, unless we have obligations. And it seems to me that universities rather weirdly, although again, you can't sell university like this. On the contrary, people say, well, why would I go to university to do that? But that's the reality, because we know students could learn everything at university for free online now. The minimal amount of, now you can ask ChatGPT, how can I get a degree online for free in computer science? It'll just tell you where to go. But no one is actually going to do that, because we're human beings. We're soft. We're not good at self-discipline. And so universities have become these places where that happens. But they are kind of magical places. They're places where people go expecting one thing and pay for it, end up getting something completely different, but aren't that unhappy that they paid for that completely different thing that initially. There's nothing like this else, I think, in the economic sphere. They defy a lot of economic analysis. And long may that last. It's great. I mean, one of the ways they're defying economic analysis is the whole push towards STEM. I'm a big fan of teaching quantitative methods. I think our students are illiterate if they can't understand the place of data and algorithms in our modern world. And I love the fact, actually, that students are going, let's go and do media studies. Let's go and do cultural studies. Forget what the government says. The government don't seem to be able to close down these courses because students keep demanding them. And that's back to this kind of personal growth thing, that students want that period in life to explore themselves and push at the boundaries of norms of the past, and that's great. That has to be part of the ecosystem as well. So I'm not going to predict, actually, Yasmin, what's going to happen, because I've been wrong before about MOOCs. And one of my sons is very aware of this, I think, and is really struggling with why he would go to university, but he's also struggling with what he would do instead. And my other son is going to be a scientist, I think, pretty nailed on. So he's like, I want to go to a science department where there are labs and I've got fantastic computers, and that makes sense. But how many students really go to university like that these days? I think it's very, very small number. So yeah, they're going to carry on, and they're very successful universities. But AI is going to be the next huge challenge, I think, for this whole space. What is learning now? What do we need to teach people to interact with our new machine partners? I'm sure you're all doing it every day. I know I am.
Yes.
We got an advice. I like this, because have you got advice for autodidacts and self-educators? Yeah, I'd like to get some advice on that, because I'm one of those, really. But I am one who puts myself in a structure that makes me learn. So I took Mandarin at UCL alongside my students because I wanted to show them that I'm a lifelong learner and that I'm always going back to zero to learn. And for 5 years, I studied Mandarin in the same class as my students with another teacher teaching us all. And I think that is important. These groups, meetup groups, of course, do a great job now. But if you really are brave and you feel you can go it alone, buy Scott Young, Ultra Learner. There's a guy, an average-ish guy, who decided, what is this stuff with institutions and learning? I'm sure I can get the Harvard computer science degree online on my own. And he went and did it himself. I think he did it in 18 months, 3-year undergraduate degree at Harvard, and 18 months online on his own. He self-defines as an unremarkable intellect, but someone who knows how to learn. And Scott Young Ultra Learning shows you basically what you need to do to learn anything on the internet that's learnable on the internet, which is a lot outside of kind of very human things. So I would take a look at that book, follow his guidance.
Perfect. Yeah, Maria posted the link here. So yeah, we'll definitely take a look into it. And yeah, I mean, so many things to ask, so many great questions here, but unfortunately we're just approaching the end of the hour. And yeah, I can't thank you enough, Carl,
Pleasure.
for being here. And yeah, everyone, thank you very much for participating. I think we need a second version of this conversation because 1 hour was enough.
I just want to say
more to discuss.
I want to share this now in 1 minute because this is the most remarkable journey of my life I'm ever going at the moment. I'm just on the verge, and it probably happened this year, of qualifying for Team GB triathlon in my age group, following my race on Sunday. I have not done any adult sport my entire life. I took this up in lockdown. I lost 18 kilograms. And this really has convinced me that anything is possible. I gave up all sports due to chronic injuries, and through an incredible, incredible learning journey, which is taking me somewhere I never dreamt, I'm now doing elite sport at my age. So I really do believe you can learn pretty much anything at any age, from sport, art, PhD in mathematics, whatever you want is possible. And that's a wonderful opportunity for us of this generation.
That's beautiful, Carl. And I think it's a very, very important message to leave for everyone and to get that inspiration. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention, everyone. You can welcome to get in
great.
touch with me
Yes.
online.
So yeah, I left Carl's LinkedIn page here for you to post all these questions for him. I've left here the LIS link as well for you to check that out. And yes, some of the amazing resources that Carl actually produced. I left the links here for you to check those out as well. And yeah, so we got to the end of the session today. And our next step is the workshop that is going to happen on June 8th on systems transformation and disruption in education. So you can, I've put the Miro board link here on the chat. I can do it again, but you can have the link here to access and register your interest to participating on that. All right.
Thanks, Yasmin. I'd love to be involved in an actual more systems conversation somewhat. We didn't even mention that. I do teach a bit on systems thinking within my course, but let's get back to that at another point. Definitely.
Yeah. You're more than welcome to join the London Hub as well. We do a lot of activities here, and here's the website, LinkedIn, and the YouTube channel where this record is going to be available. And yes, thank you very much, everyone, for participating.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Carl.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
And here, feedback, we'll just put the Miro board link here again for you to give us a quick feedback and give any inputs that you'd like for us to improve our sessions. All right. Yes, Tanya.
And we've also been creating summaries and visuals throughout the whole process. So those will be posted within the next coming week.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Anya and Jos, for the amazing work with that as well. And yes, fantastic, everyone. Thank you for being here. Much pleasure, and see you next time. Bye.